All right, hello everyone, Tevin Townsend here. We've got some hot topics to discuss today. First of all, let me preface this by saying I am not one to sit around and complain about racism, discrimination, or social issues. A lot of it is a distraction. A lot of it is funded propaganda, if not all. And a lot of it is just a bunch of complaining. I'm about action. And so in my discussing this, I hope to educate people. It's about knowing your rights, and it's about knowing how to take action. Because if you complain about it, that won't be respected. The only thing that's going to be respected is if they have to face the consequences of their transgressions, right? Let's talk about the Starbucks incident, where apparently now it's a crime to sit at a table, not get coffee, and meet with a friend, okay? If you're going to Starbucks and you're doing that, you might be at risk of trespassing. I don't want to just destroy Starbucks' name, because I actually think that was the employee there, or maybe just the policy at that particular Starbucks. It does happen. And the CEO apologized. He looks genuine, but those pockets, a corporation is what it is. It's a corporation whose sole purpose is to generate revenue. And the value of the black dollar couldn't be any more pronounced now with the success of the Black Panther film. So now people are really seeing, wow, we have to cater to these people, or else we're losing a very big market. So these two individuals, when the police were called unnecessarily, defended themselves or resisted, even though it's not actual resistance in my book. What happens when the police are called and you assert your rights is they'll always create this extravagant story later saying you resisted arrest, you weren't compliant, you didn't follow an order. All of this intimidative, forceful stuff. And they paint you out to be the villain, and they're the victim. And also the person that called is the victim as well. So let's look at the meaning of trespassing. When I think of trespassing, I think of walking by some property that has this big sign up that says no trespassing. Something like no dogs allowed, or beware of dog. That's what I meant to say. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's very clear that if you ignore that and you go into this property, you're trespassing. There's no argument there. When you walk into a Starbucks, no one is trespassing. They don't have no trespassing signs up. You're only trespassing when selectively some employee there wants you out, and then they say you're trespassing. So let's get that straight. Some people are looking at the fact that they said they were trespassing, but they're not looking at the basis for it and what happened before then, and just the basis for the meaning of trespassing in general. So, when these guys went into Starbucks, they weren't trespassing. The only reason they're trespassing is because an employee took issue with them and decided to say, leave, and if you don't leave, you're trespassing. That's it. They didn't do anything wrong. Now, they were waiting on a friend. It seemed to be a misunderstanding. And we don't really have all the facts. I've heard that they were there for 3 hours, using up Wi-Fi and a bunch of resources without buying a single thing. And I heard they were just there for 15 minutes. I don't know which one is true. If this is litigated and there's a discovery process, I'm sure we'll get to the facts. Until now, whichever story is true, the actions don't add up. So the police end up handcuffing the guys because the guys wanted to defend themselves. When the police come and you try to explain the issue, they don't care. All they care about is, we got a disturbance call, we were called to remove you, and we'll remove you by force if we have to. And that's just crazy that someone can do that to you. And that just makes me, as an African American male, black male, there's a system that targets you. And when it comes to the police, if you don't play it smart, it could be the difference between life or death. It could be the difference between losing your freedom. I mean, it's like you're set up to lose. Actually, I'm not going to say it's like you're set up to lose, but you are set up to lose. It is what it is. And so there are two routes you can take. You can just be perfectly compliant, or you can defend your rights. Here's what happens when you're perfectly compliant. What happened at Starbucks can just happen again. What's going to stop this guy from just calling the police, taking advantage of a stereotypical system that targets people? What's going to stop him from doing that? He can just threaten people, hey, if you don't leave, I'm going to call the police. Call the police. All right, we're going to handcuff you and take you to jail for no reason. Just because we have the force and just because we can do it. That is not cool. And something like that happened to me recently. I'll get into that in just a second. I'm not for complaining unless there's action. And before action, you just have to have knowledge, because the action's not effective unless you know how to litigate it and unless you know your rights. So when people defend their rights, there's nothing wrong with that if they did nothing wrong. The police will do what they can to make up a story and say you were resisting, you weren't following orders. I saw this video this morning that was so sick. It was about these police departments in South Florida. Apparently, they're not letting people file police complaints there. And when people go to file the complaints, they're met with intimidation tactics by the police, and the police are asking, "Let me see your ID," and all this stuff. I mean, how do you bring the law against the police? When we look at this incident, you have to not only say the person that made the call was without merit, but the police's actions weren't reasonable either. And so do we place the blame solely on the person that made the call, or do we also have to look at making the police force more intelligent, knowing when to use force? Just think about it. How can someone be handcuffed physically for nonviolence, for sitting at a table? That's what happened. That's what happened. I'm not distorting that. That is what happened. Okay. So moving on to my story, I was recently trying to get some document notarized at City Hall in Horn Lake, Mississippi. I have never personally detected much racism addressed to me in my life. Not saying it doesn't happen. There's a lot of racism and discrimination that happens that we don't catch on to. Banks, I know for a fact, they discriminate all the time. They did it with housing. They still do it today, except they're more intelligent. So that if they can discriminate by your credit, they can discriminate by neighborhood. There are all kinds of ways they discriminate. They just find new ways of doing it once their ways of doing it are exposed. That's just how discrimination operates. And so it goes on without you detecting it. And then sometimes you detect it, and when you do, it's a very horrible feeling. I don't have soft skin. I know the world we live in. I know it's the United States of America. It is what it is. If someone calls me the N-word, I'm not going to cry. It's not the first time I've been called that. It won't be the last. And the thing about me is I'm about as white as they come for a black person. I'm told that all my life. And I don't do stupid stuff. We do have black people that do stupid stuff in certain situations, and that have to be smarter. We have to train. You literally have to train people today to know, look, there is a system against you, and you got to treat this like chess and try to be a little more composed and know your rights, and just understand how the system works against you. So anyways, I was just trying to get this document notarized the other day at City Hall. Public facility, public services, city employees. And as they were looking at my documents, for whatever reason, they were very suspicious of what I was presenting and what I was requesting. And so they asked a few questions. I answered as best as I could. And this is me talking to the clerk, the lady up front. And so then she goes to her supervisor towards the back, and he comes back up, and he's heated for some reason. He's saying, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And I'm just confused where his energy is coming from. And I say, well, this is a standard form. It was an I-9 form. It's a work verification form. Standard across all the states. It's federal. So, and there was nothing special about my form. It was standard. But they were saying, well, your particular form is, I've never seen it. It's different. And I said, whoa. There's nothing different about this form. And so then the conversation shifted to another excuse. And then it shifted to another excuse. And I said, okay, this really can't be happening to me, right? For some reason, they're suspicious of me, and I don't know why they're suspicious of me. So I don't know if it was my hair or the clothes I was wearing or the sound of my voice. I have no idea what it was, but they wouldn't tell me what it was. And so they made up lies, and when they couldn't lie anymore, he said, doesn't this form come with instructions? I guess he didn't know it came with instructions, but I think he did. And so I said yes, and he said, well, you're missing the instructions. If you had the instructions, we could do it. Okay. So I ended up going back to get those instructions, and I was gonna just try and find somewhere else to get the document notarized. That's normally what I do. Unfortunately, a lot of places don't do I-9s, and I specifically went to City Hall because they had done it before, and I knew they do it, and also because it's City Hall. Public servants, a public service for the people, for the residents. I just wouldn't expect the kind of treatment that I ended up getting, right? So everything I did was completely appropriate and logical and reasonable. And I've been turned down notarizations before under the basis that, oh, you're not a client of ours. That happens at a lot of banks. Or, hey, we just don't do this form. It's never been an issue. I said, okay, hey, yeah, I'll just go to the next place. Unfortunately, I really needed to be at this place. And what really frustrated me and upset me was, first of all, under the public notary code, I had to look this up after the whole incident, and sure enough, it turns out you can't just deny people just to deny people. You can't do it for personal reasons. You can't be rude to people. And so I found 3 violations that I filed in a complaint earlier today. I mailed it off, so I'll probably talk about that in the near future. This guy I was talking to, this supervisor, stated we can refuse anyone we want to, and he said on one of the other forms I brought in to have notarized, he said, you know what, we'll notarize it only because you said please. You can't be talking to people like that in a public position, and you can't do that under the public notary code of conduct. You just can't. You have to comport yourself in a way befitting a public officer. That's what it says. So I listed out the violations. And by the way, when you are a public notary and you work for a bank, you're a public officer still. I just found that out when I looked up the code. And a bank cannot refuse to notarize a document because you're not a client. It specifically states under the code that they cannot do that. So people actually do suffer from these illegal acts all the time. It's just, I mean, it's not worth doing anything about it. And that's the issue with a lot about law, is that, you know, people are wronged all the time. It's just who's going to expend the time and the resources to fight this when it's really not worth it, or yeah, I can just go to the next place. So they get away with it. And this guy thought he was going to get away, but he really messed up. First of all, you have to have a valid due cause. There are a list of acceptable reasons in the code that you have to go by in order for you to refuse someone. That could be inauthentic documents or improperly presented documents, bad signatures, things of that nature. It can never just be, well, I don't want to do it because I don't want to do it, or I can refuse anyone I want to, or just because I'm uncomfortable. The uncomfortable argument has to have a valid reason behind you being uncomfortable. And so as I began to ask him, I came back with the instructions. And even when I came back with the instructions, he still refused. So at that point, I said, well, man, what is going on? You keep changing your story, and you just, for whatever reason, are treating me this way. And I just would like to know the reason. I never demanded that he notarize it. I never got loud, never made any acts of aggression, was never violent, did nothing of the sort. Guess what this guy does? He calls the police. And I'm standing there, and I'm asking him, why would this be necessary? Because under the code, I actually have a right to inquire about why he's refusing me, which he wouldn't provide, and it was his duty to provide. This, I'm just uncomfortable, doesn't fly. And you know, I basically stated in my complaint that using I'm uncomfortable can cloak all kinds of forms of discrimination. What are you uncomfortable with? I mean, are you uncomfortable with my hair? Or, I mean, you can't just do that. And so this guy, when I just asked for the reason, which I have a right to, he calls the police because he's at his ropes. I did everything he requested, and they're not telling me what it is. They're just saying we don't want to do it. And he's being rude. And he called the police for no reason. So the officer comes in. Well, before the officer comes in, once he gets off the phone, he looks at me, and he's very smug, and he says, "Are you still here?" I think I'm paraphrasing. And I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking in my mind, this guy must have, he was probably expecting that I would run with my tail between my legs like I did something wrong or committed a crime. I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm just sitting there, well, I mean, I don't mind talking to the officer when he comes because I didn't do anything wrong. But he's looking at me so smug, like he thought I was going to run or something because he called the police. And this is this culture that is really screwed up where people think they can just say your name, give your name over the phone to the police and say all this and that about you, even when it's not true, even when it's not justified, and face no consequences. And so that really, really upset me. So the officer comes in, and we go out and talk, and it's the same thing. They don't really care about the truth. All they care about is, hey, it's a disturbance call. He called the police on you, and we're just here to defuse the situation. Thank goodness they didn't get physical, but the officer, the lieutenant, was a very poor excuse for an officer just, not even advising me to take up for my rights. His advice is, I don't really care about that. I just need to go. You're holding me up. He literally said I was holding him up. And my reply was, well, actually, I know this is silly to you, but I didn't call you. The other guy called you. And so, when he saw the situation, he was able to immediately tell there was no real cause for concern. There wasn't going to be a police report, wouldn't even provide me documentation. Now, at this point, I was done. It's not like I was trying to force them to sign, but since they went through the trouble of calling the cops on me, let me get some documentation so I can clear my name, and so I can have this contained in my complaint as evidence. And so they wouldn't give me any documentation, and it was weird. So I called the police station while I was on the phone with them to confirm, and he didn't even want me to call the police station. Luckily, the lobby was right next door because this is City Hall, so I walked into the police station. And there was a clerk there who we sort of went over the whole issue with, and she notarized what I needed to have notarized. And right before I walked in the door, the lieutenant was saying, "Don't go in there," like it was an order. Like, really? You're ordering me not to go into the police station? Like, what's the deal? Are you trying to help me, or are you just trying to, like, what's the deal? And so I walked in anyway against his advice, and I resolved the issue. He also didn't want to give me the number to the police station. When I asked for it, he was like, "Well, why do you need to call them? We're already here." And I was like, well, obviously I want to call them to talk to someone else or to confirm. And I basically said, well, he was like, "Well, you don't need it right now," or I don't know. So I said, well, I can need it for future reference. Then he gave me the number, and then I called. So, the main point here is you can let these people rape you in the ass, or you can do something about it. So when someone says, "I'm going to call the police on you because I can use that against you and take advantage of you," you tell them, "Well, I'm going to call the court on you, and we'll see what happens." And so maybe they'll think twice about doing those kinds of things. That's my take on it. All right, this has been Tevin Townsend. You guys have a great day.